Today on Across the Fence, A Winter's Tale. We'll learn about the events of 1816, or as that fateful year is known in Vermont, 1800 and froze to death. Find out what happened, how it happened, and why this church in Bethel is central to the story of the year without a summer. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Keith Silva in for Judy Simpson. We're all familiar with the old adage, if you don't like the weather in New England now, just wait a few minutes. This phrase often holds true winter, spring, summer, and fall. But what if it didn't? What if winter came and never left? This isn't a story some writer dreamed up, it really happened. 200 years ago, the snows of winter gave way to spring planting and the promise of warmth, and then winter returned with a vengeance. Newspaper reports across New England and the mid-Atlantic states mentioned July frosts, freezing temperatures in August, and fears of famine. Even the hardiest of Vermonters had to wonder what was happening. Let's join Vermont historian Howard Coffin at a historic site in central Vermont to find out what happened when summer never came to Vermont.
The United Church of Bethel, right here smack in the middle of Bethel, Vermont, in the year 2016, is 200 years old. It was built to last, built of brick, made in a yard just down the street. In the basement is Bethel White, the whitest granite in the world, and it has lasted. This church came into being in what may have been the darkest, coldest year in the history of Vermont. It was known as 1800 and froze to death. No one could have seen what was coming in the winter of 1815 and 16. It was an unusually mild winter, followed by a mild Vermont spring, and summer was coming on nicely, until the night of June 5th and 6th, when a mighty snow touched the land, and within 3 days, snowdrifts were as much as 3 feet deep, and the first crops were beginning to die. The awful year had begun. In July, there were frosts and more snow. In August, in Middlebury, the temperature suddenly went up to 90 degrees and then plummeted below freezing, and a great drought set in. It became so dry that forest fires broke out in the Adirondacks. The smoke drifted across the lake to Burlington, and visibility there was only a few feet at times. In September, the cold persisted, and October began with a foot of snow. The catastrophe was not only in Vermont. It was nearly apparently worldwide. We now know that a great volcano had erupted in the Pacific and spread a great cloud of ash all around the world. In Europe, the writers Lord Byron and Mary Shelley had planned to spend a happy summer in Switzerland in the Alps, writing happy things. But the clouds descended, the cold came on, and Mary Shelley went indoors to write a novel called Frankenstein. The result of this winter without a summer, as some called it, others called it the starvation year, eventually would mean that up to 15,000 Vermonters would pick up and leave. Among those who left Vermont was a family from Norwich renting a farmhouse down there named Smith. They took with them their son Joseph and went to Western New York State. He, of course, would found the Mormon religion. Most people stayed, and many became part of a religious revival. Of course, the darkness and cold brought fear. O Lord, our help in ages past. People flocked to the churches, and of course, they built a new one in Bethel. When the year finally ended, this church had been dedicated on Christmas Eve. With the coming of the new year, something strange happened in Vermont. St. Elmo's fire came from the skies, and the fence posts and trees and church steeples and even people's hair had a great glow about it. What was it? What was this mystery? The mystery deepened, but finally, with spring, came a normal summer, and Vermont's 1,800 and froze to death became a well-remembered history.
And we raise our glasses of the mulled winter wine with a toast.
On this Sunday morning, the congregation of the United Church of Bethel is welcoming in the Christmas season. Decorations are going up, and the choir is in good voice. The history of the church has been chronicled by a longtime resident, a member of this community, and someone I'm proud to call a friend. Janet Burnham, historian, author, and deacon of the United Church of Bethel. We're here in her historic home, which I understand to be the oldest house in Bethel Village, and it has something to do, very much to do, with the religious history of this village. Janet.
That's true, and it's not I don't believe it's the oldest house entirely in Bethel, but the oldest one in the village, as you said. And it was 37 years before they built a church here in town. So before that, they had visiting ministers and so on and so forth, and they had to have it in barns or fields or houses, and this particular room, which they called the Foursquare Room, was a place that they often held a church service.
So church services were held right here.
Yes, right here.
And if memory serves me, there was a rather famous preacher who would have preached here.
Yes, that was Hosea Ballou, who was probably the most influential preacher to forward the thinking about universalism.
Do you think there's a connection between the weather and the building of the church?
Absolutely, had to be. They said that, historians say that between 10 and 15,000 people packed up and left Vermont.
It could be the world was ending, perhaps.
Absolutely. The end times, like it said in the Bible, the end times. And they would have no way of knowing then that a volcano half a world away was causing the weather to act peculiarly.
Today, as we begin this celebration of 200 years in this building, what it was that
Sunday service at places of worship like the United Church of Bethel brings people together.
How important are these churches to our communities? They're extremely important in the terms that they have been the anchors of our community since the earliest days. They are built at the head of our towns on a hill at the head of the green. They are part and parcel of what a Vermont village is all about. They were the center of village life as meeting houses and places to congregate for all sorts of things that have kind of fallen by the wayside due to modern society. However, they still remain extremely important because even in a state that is the least churched in the nation, they have a place. They have a place in our lives and in the fabric of our communities. For what do we do for weddings if we don't have them? What do we do with our dead if we don't have a church to carry them to and from to our churchyards and honor them? What do we do if we do not have these places to come to in times of crisis, both nationally and internationally? When we have a local tragedy, it is the place where we still gather. When we mourn a local person, it's the place where we come to share our community's grief and begin to do that healing. If we ever lose these places, we have lost the soul of Vermont. We meet people where they are. On our bulletin, it says you are welcome here. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We mean that. We truly mean that. And I think that if you meet people where they are, if you don't take yourself too seriously, if you try and explain each and every week some tiny way that people can take the lesson they've heard and not just listen to it as some theoretical thing, but to take that piece of theology into their lives throughout the week, that we give them something to look forward to, something to practice, if you will, in their lives, and something that bonds them together with others in a family. And church is very much a family. So I think meeting people where they are, meeting their needs on a day-to-day basis, and not trying to be something that we aren't, speaks a lot for us. We're more like a diner than a five-star restaurant. I tell people, if you don't like organized religion, you've come to the right place, because this is disorganized religion at its finest.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
In 2016, a Vermont State Historic Marker will be dedicated on the front lawn of this church. This grand old building will become the official place of remembrance for the year Vermont nearly froze to death.
I'm joined by Howard Coffin in the studio now. Howard, welcome back to Across the Fence.
Nice to be here.
Howard, is 1800 and froze to death a phrase you grew up hearing?
Absolutely. I remember it from my earliest years. I can remember my grandmother Coffin talking about it. It's just been part of Vermont ever since that cold year.
200 years ago. Howard, you've been doing some more research into this year and things that were happening. You found some interesting things from a former Vermont historian.
Yes, I've been looking at Abby Maria Hemingway. I'm looking everywhere. I want to learn as much as I can about this year. I'm going to give a talk in Bethel in September. Anybody who knows about more about this year, please call me in Montpelier. Yes, I was looking at the town of Hardwick, which was my wife's hometown, and Hemingway reports that about this time there were many emigrations to what was then called the West, but few went farther than the Genesee Valley. And she also notes the sheep had just been sheared and had to be covered again with their fleeces, and there was little or no hay for them or the cattle, and many of them died. And one more thing, listen to this.
All right.
The governor of Vermont, Jonas Galusha, issues a proclamation. We ought enter the courts of the Lord with penitence for sin and prayer for pardon. They were scared.
And it wasn't just the people. Obviously, the government was, the governor was trying to rally everyone and try to figure out what was going on.
Well, they didn't know what was going on. The sudden climate change, we have gradual climate change today, it terrified them. They didn't know where this darkness and cold was coming from. They had no idea.
Now, Howard, the 19th century wasn't kind to immigrations from Vermont, because in 1816 you mentioned about 15,000 Vermonters left. There was another immigration almost another 50 years later. What happened?
Well, of course, the Civil War. After the Civil War, a lot of those young men who had gone to other parts of the country to fight came home and decided they didn't want to be on the farms anymore, and they went west. And the western migration was often to Wisconsin or to Michigan or some to the south, but they'd seen some leveler farmland and some easier climates, so yes, they went too.
Less stone in those fields, I bet. Howard, we just got about a minute or so left. This is a real call to action for folks. If they want to learn more about history, this is something where you say, go back, find about your family history or buildings in your town.
I'd be very interested to know whether other churches were built in 1816. What did this bring about? I really don't know. And we're celebrating this year. Christmas Eve is our actual anniversary, and we want to know all we can. And it's a welcoming church. We want everyone to come to the church at Bethel and join us in our celebration.
And send people out to their town clerks and find out about the history of their town. Maybe another church was built in 1816 because of what was happening here.
When you find it, call Howard Coffin.
Will do. Well, Howard, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. I want to thank everyone here at WCAX for making this program possible. And as always, thank you for stopping by Across the Fence.